From basic economics or beginner level economics, we know that the government have three main policies: monetary, fiscal, and supply side policies that they use to influence the economy, especially to influence the GDP in the economy. And those policies, expansionary or contractionary, will have effects on the economy, and those policies, expansionary or contractionary, is going to have some side effects on the economy, and then we evaluate them, whether they are effective, not effective, worth it, not worth it, XYZ. And that's what most basic economics or high school level economics is based upon. We don't really get into why and how. We don't really get into why does the monetary or fiscal or supply side policy affect, and how does it actually affect the economy or the GDP level in the economy. If you're someone watching this video, I'm assuming you want to go beyond that level, or you're someone who's pursuing a degree in economics or economics related subject, and in that situation we have to understand the nitty-gritty stuff, which is essentially why and how does these policies actually affect the economy, and how can we understand that. We did that for the domestic level by using the ISLM model. The ISLM model is used to derive and to understand how does these policies affect the GDP level in the economy on a domestic level. And we did that for the domestic economy by analyzing the ISLM model. And if you haven't watched those videos, make sure that you have a clear understanding of how we derive the ISLM model and how the ISLM model policies are, how the policies are used to influence the ISLM model, which in turn influences the economy, which I have covered in the previous video. So make sure you watch them before understanding this topic. To keep in mind that the ISLM model developed by Fleming and Mundell, or it's also called as the Mundell Fleming model, it's not a new model per se. It's simply a modification of the ISLM model in the closed economy. So it's the ISLM model in the closed economy, and we are factoring in the open economy in the sense that we factor in net exports and net imports, essentially trying to factor in what's going to happen if the model was used in an open economy. And for the analysis and understanding, they won a Nobel Prize in 1999. So with that precursor, let's get on to understanding how we derive the IS curve and the LM curve in the open economy using the Mundell Fleming model. In a closed economy, equilibrium point is reached when withdrawals, let's call this withdrawals and injections in the economy equal out. If we factor out consumption from both sides, which essentially means savings plus taxation is equal to investment plus government spending, which is the basis of the ISLM model in the domestic economy or in a closed economy. And we understand that the LM curve was derived as a function of money demand rate relative to the interest rate, and using those two we construct our ISLM model in a closed economy. Well, what's going to happen when we factor in our net exports or net imports? So let's try to look at it algebraically. First of all, we're going to have the same equation, saving plus taxation. However, now along with taxation in an open economy, we know that we also have, along with taxation, one of the other withdrawals is imports. We know that in an open economy, along with taxation, you would also have imports, and with investment plus government spending, we will also have exports. We are factoring it exports and we are factoring in imports. And let's try to simplify these equations: savings plus taxation plus net imports, and understand that import is a function of income. By this income I mean domestic income relative to exchange rate. In some textbooks they use a symbol pi for exchange rate. I'm going to use a symbol E just for simplicity so that we don't get over complicated, and is equal to investment plus government spending plus, see if I have some space here, plus net exports. And net export is a function of foreign income relative to the exchange rate, and that makes intuitive sense. Think about it from a consumer's perspective. If I want to import goods and services from abroad, I need to use my income, which is the income I have, which is gonna be in the domestic currency, and use that income to buy whatever I have to buy from abroad. And if I'm someone from the domestic market who wants to export some goods and services, I have to export them relative to the foreign income, in the sense that If the foreigners income decline, let's say I'm from country B and you're from country A, and you're trying to export some goods to me. In that situation, if my income declines, I won't have the same level of income or the purchasing power to buy goods and services from you. So your export depends on my income. If I have more money, I'm going to buy more stuff from you. If I have less money, I'll buy less stuff from you. So exports in the economy depend on the foreigner's income and not the domestic income, whereas the imports depend on the domestic income, because it is a domestic consumers. If their income increases, they are going to buy more exports. If their income decreases, they will buy less of the exports. Relative to the exchange market, and that makes intuitive sense also because they'll be trading to the exchange market. So any influences on the exchange market is going to influence net exports and imports in the economy. And this is the algebraic identification or the identity that we use to understand the IS-LM model in the at least the IS part of the IS-LM model in an open economy. Let's try to understand that graphically as well. If for the examination purposes and for your understanding purposes, you need to know both the algebraic and the graphical way of understanding it. Let me see if I can remove this quickly. Just give me a second. Okay, let's try to understand it graphically. And these graphs might sound very complicated. I've tried to simplify them. In reality, if you were to probably Google them, you'll probably find a lot more complicated graph. I've tried to simplify them for the sake of understanding, because we are just trying to understand the effects of net exports in the economy. In our previous videos, and from our basic economics of how the IS-LM model works in a closed economy, we already know how to derive the IS and the LM curve in the closed economy. I'm making that assumption because at this level you are supposed to know how the IS-LM model is derived. So we will focus mainly on factoring in net exports. What's going to happen to the IS-LM model when we factor in net exports? Look at the first diagram over here. The first diagram shows the relationship between export, or the relationship between exchange rate and net exports. As the net exports increase, our exchange rate decreases, and as our exchange rate increases, our net export decreases. So how do we understand that? Let's assume that we have two countries, A, and let's say we have B. Let's say we have someone from A. Say we've got someone else from B. Let's say that the person from country A has a nominal income of, let's say, $100. What's going to happen if the value for dollar increases? Well, if the value for dollar increases, let's say now that I have $140, in that situation, what's going to happen? Because I have more purchasing power, I'm gonna import more stuff. I'm gonna import more stuff from country B, simply because I have more money. I can buy better brands. I can look towards the international market to have a more higher standard of living. Well, what's going to happen if the income declines? Let's say that my income declines. Let's say that for some reason, that my income is no longer, let's say $90. In that situation, what's going to happen? In that situation, since my purchasing power has dropped, I no longer have the luxury to buy expensive imports from abroad. I'm gonna turn towards domestic market. I'm going to turn towards domestic market. Why is that? Because usually speaking, in most situations, the goods and services that we have available in the domestic market is cheaper than the goods and services that we import. So a rational consumer would switch from imports towards more domestic products, assuming that the same product is available in the domestic market, and that is gonna cause the domestic market to be more profitable, and that is gonna cause the domestic market to export more material abroad. Since they are more profitable, they have more production. Theoretically speaking, if they are rational, they'll try to export some of the materials that they produce abroad towards international market. The idea is, whenever the exchange rate appreciates, whenever we have appreciation, whenever the exchange rate appreciates, that intuitively means that my income has more purchasing power abroad, meaning my dollars can buy more stuff abroad because the dollars have appreciated, and therefore we will have increase in imports and decrease in export, because consumers are buying more imports and they are buying less export. Whenever we have an appreciation of exchange rate, people's purchasing power abroad increases, so they will buy more imports, and when they buy more imports, domestic firms don't benefit as much. As a result, exports decline. And when the exchange rate depreciates, well, then domestic people turn towards domestic markets become more profitable, and therefore we will have more exports. And this graph over here is essentially the visual representation of what I've already explained. So let's say that the initial point of exchange rate, let's say we have another point here. Let's say this is E1. Let's call it E1. Let's call it NX0. Let's call this point NX1. What is happening? Essentially, in this diagram, I'm causing the currency to appreciate from E0 to E1. Well, how will that have an impact on the Keynesian cross? On the Keynesian cross, when our currency appreciates, our net exports, which is represented by NX0 and NX1, our net exports are gonna decline. This is, by the way, this is a general rule of thumb you have to keep in mind. It's an acronym that is used in a lot of textbooks. Maybe you might have gone through that in your high school. VDEC. If I'm VDEC, is it yes, something like that. Essentially, weaker currency means you have more imports, and depreciation means you have more exports. It means that whenever we have appreciation, we will have more imports, and whenever we have depreciation, you will have more exports. This is a general rule of thumb you have to keep in mind whenever we talk about exchange rate, because we will go through this point over and over again in a lot of theory that we see in our textbooks. So just keep in mind, appreciation means more imports and depreciation means more exports. And I've gone through the explanation here, which does make intuitive sense, assuming that our consumers are all rational. Let me see if I can quickly remove that one. Okay. So now let's get back to our topic and understanding how to derive the IS curve. So in the Keynesian curve, when the currency appreciates, we are going to have a decline. We are going to have a decline in our net exports. And let's say that this point over here is represented by A. Let's say that this point over here is represented by B. Therefore, this point would be A. This point would be B. We know that when the Keynesian cross, when the Keynesian cross intersects with our planned output, that's essentially our equilibrium point. And if I can use a scale and try to draw a straight line across, see if I can try to do that, and straight line across these 2 points. See if I can do that. Okay. So this over here is our point A intersecting with each other. That's our point A, and that is our point B. And if you can draw a straight line through these 2 points, you will get a downward sloping curve, which is essentially our IS curve in the IS Lm model. But keep in mind, this is the IS curve factoring in exchange rate. In normal IS curve, on our normal IS curve, on the x-axis we have the interest rate. However, for the sake of understanding, we are only considering exchange rate, and as you can already see, even with only considering exchange rate, the diagrams do become complicated. So imagine factoring in all the other diagrams for investment, savings, and consumer and spending. It's going to become complicated. So whenever you are asked to explain how to derive the IS model in the exchange rate market, we have to make an assumption that we already know how the IS Lm model is derived in the closed economy, or maybe try to derive the IS Lm model in the closed economy first and then try to factor in. That will make your explanation a lot more understandable and the graphs easy to draw. So hopefully this gives you an understanding of how to draw the IS curve in the closed economy. What about the LM curve? Well, the LM curve is a function of our money demanded by rate of interest, and both of these have nothing to do with the exchange rate market. It has to do with your domestic market. So therefore, when we combine the IS LM curve in an open economy, The shape of the curve is exactly the same as that of a closed economy, except that in the open economy we don't just have government minus taxation, we also have net exports. We factor in net exports, and they become the factor influencing the IS curve, whereas the LM curve is identical to the closed economy model, which is the function of income over the function of income with interest rate. So hopefully this gives you a basic understanding of how to derive the ISLM curve in an open economy, and that is essentially what Mundell and Fleming try to analyze and use to explain how we can control or how the government policies affect the exchange rate market, which we'll go through in the next coming few videos. So make sure that you stay tuned and watch those videos also if you want to have a better understanding. But before we close off, there's one thing that I want to leave you guys with, is that in the open economy, along with the ISLM curve, there's also one more curve which is called as the BP curve. This is called as the balance of payment curve. Essentially, this curve is a point where our balance of payment equal out or is equal to zero. So any point on this curve, any point A, any point B, our balance of payment would equal out and will be equal to zero. Any point below the curve would mean the government or the economy is in a deficit, a balance of payment deficit. Any point above is going to mean that the country is in a surplus. And it is used to understand the effects of policies on the exchange rate. So just keep this in mind. It's not very hard. It's a very simple curve. It's a very simple straight line. So just keep that in mind, and I hope this explanation gives you a basic understanding of how we derive the IS and the LM curve in an open economy or in an open market.